excited that everybody's here. We've got two really great speakers tonight that I'm excited to hear. I'm probably most excited because I don't have to speak. So, which we're going to bring, come back to that in just a minute here. Really quick about Rebug. If you haven't heard about us, what we do is we do architecture reviews, we do training, but our large part of what we do is we do consulting. I'm an Angular GDE. Brian Love is an Angular GDE over there. We have two other GDEs as well that works. If you don't know what a GDE is, that's a Google developer expert. So we're here to help you figure out your applications and help you with any problems that you have. Let's see here. Really important, code of conduct. This is something that we implemented about 6 months ago, and this is something that's really important to us. We want to be able to create an environment here where we all feel safe to learn, and that no one's harassing anybody else. And this goes down to what technology choices I'm making, you know, just everything. We want to just create an environment of learning and fun, and that we can all have a good time at. So if you have any questions about this, you can go out to the website and read that in more detail. We've got our annual holiday hangout meetup that's coming up. Let's see, that's on Wednesday, December 5th. And it's actually at Battery 621. So if you haven't been there yet, that's basically Santa Fe and 6th Avenue. It's a beautiful space. There's ping pong and cornhole, and we'll bring in holiday food. And really, it's a great opportunity to hang out and network. I believe we're doing some lightning talks. There's going to be some giveaways and like I said, games. If there's a foosball table, I'll take anybody on. There'll be a really big prize if you can beat me.
He's a hustler.
I played once or twice. All right. My excitement about tonight is really because of what we've been really focusing on the last few months, which is a call for presenters. This is a community for all of us, and we can't do this alone. And so I'm asking that if you have an idea and you think you might want to present, like start out with a 5-minute talk even. Come up here for 5 minutes and talk about something that you're passionate about, something cool that you're either doing at work or something that you're doing in a side project. Or maybe you're currently investigating, you know, some new package, some new library that you think is actually kind of cool. Would love to have you get up here and do a presentation. Like I say, if you're nervous, let's start with 5 minutes. I'll bet you'll talk for 10 at least, but we could start with 5, right? If you'd like to get involved with that, would love to have you email us at meetups@Rebug. Myself, Brian Love, and some of the other members here for Rocky Mountain Angular would be willing to work with you, help you put your presentation together, and give you some tips and pointers on what would help you make a successful presentation. So we're here to help and make this fun for you and make this not such a scary thing. So, and by the way, I started doing this, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, and you could not do any worse than my first presentation. Okay, it was monotone, head buried into the laptop, and trying to show peace. So anybody can do this. All right, so we always like to open this up here with, is anybody looking for work? Anybody looking for a job? Anyone just get done with school and is looking, or is anyone currently between jobs or about ready they're looking? All right, sir.
Sort of, but I would like to work remotely. I currently live in Oregon. So yes, if you have a remote opportunity, I'm mostly a full stack developer, main expertise in content, single page applications. I have experience for around 5 years. So yeah, so if you're interested, I don't know, you can just come to me and talk.
Excellent, sounds great.
I'm Dave Fisher. I'm going to be looking for work in a year. About a year of Angular, probably 6 months of Angular JS, but 5 years of JavaScript frameworks, mostly a C# developer on the backside.
Excellent. Excellent. Anybody else? All right. Who's looking for developers? Who's got big projects that needs developers?
Charter.
Charter, yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. So there might be some possibilities there. All right. Who else?
Forward.
Pardon me?
Search Forward.
Search Forward. Okay. What are you guys looking for?
They're doing everything. Project I'm working on is a lot of Angular. Angular 7, 6, whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Do you guys do remote? Can somebody do?
It's all remote.
Oh, the 8. So I think we got a little connection there. Excellent. Yes, sir.
Hi guys. I'm actually a technical recruiter out here in Denver. I'm working with a few clients actually up in like Louisville area that are looking for JavaScript like full stack developers. I know it seems like not many of you guys are looking for a job, but if you guys know anyone, we are looking, and so at the senior level as well.
Excellent. I'm gonna throw my name into the hat as well. My company Breebug, we're always looking for senior level developers. We primarily focus on NGRX and enterprise class systems. So big fun systems, lots of users, lots of really complex problems, and we do some remote as well. So if you would actually talk to maybe Brian Love, right? Brian, raise your hand again over there at the end, and talk to him a little bit and see if there might be a possibility there as well. So anybody else looking for work or looking for developers? How can we help each other out? All right.
I'm tentatively looking for work. So I guess I've been doing Angular 6 for about a year and a half. It didn't start out being Angular 6, but I've been doing Angular for about a year and a half, full stack developer, mostly doing Python backend, Angular front end, and been a developer for about 2.5 years. So if anyone wants to snake me with my company, go for it.
Excellent. Anybody looking for data scientists? Anybody looking for data scientists? We have an amazing one over here who's looking for an opportunity. I don't know why you didn't stand up and announce so you're looking. But if you're not going to do it, I'm going to do it for you.
I thought this was an Angular.
You know what? It's an Angular event, but we're here to support each other in any way we possibly can. Can you stand up and tell us what you're looking for and what you specialize in?
So I'm looking for junior data scientists, data analytics, trying to get my foot in the door. I'm working with Python, R, doing a little bit of SQL, probably need to work on that a bit, but essentially entry level.
I'm actually volunteering.
Awesome. Chat later.
Excellent, fantastic. All right, so when we get done tonight, feel free to hang out and network a little bit more. I always encourage people to reach out and talk to each other and see what you're doing, find out and see what kind of synergy we might be able to create between each other and what we can do to help each other. So housekeeping, couple of things. The Wi-Fi, you can jump onto Clinic's guest. The information, that one's different.
That's their connection.
Oh.
Clinic's guest wasn't working earlier, so that's.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So Clinic's guest is not working. You can see the one up there. You can use that one instead. I don't see us having this problem, but we don't want to sit at any of the desks back there. So this is a working office for another group that with Quinix is the name of the company. And so they're gracious enough to sponsor and host us in this space. And so we want to be respectful of their equipment and their desks and whatnot. So bathrooms are out the main doors here. And if you make a right down the hall and to the left, so those are over there. There's signs, great signage and whatnot. So, all right, I think we're up to announcements. I want to bring up Brian Love he's our weekend reporter here for Angular announcements. All right, here, Brian, come on up.
We just want to give you guys kind of a couple of updates that we've seen from the community. Obviously, some of this stuff, hopefully you've already read about it. But Angular 7 dropped, was that a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that? I don't know. So Angular 7 dropped, and then also Angular Material 7. Those versions, the major releases, are synced up. So a couple of things to note on Angular 7. TypeScript 3.1 is now supported, so you get some more features in there. Shadow DOM version 1 and slots is also supported. Has anybody heard about the differences in the Shadow DOM stuff? Yeah, a little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about it there?
Differences from V0?
Yeah, well, V0 is like deprecated, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
yes.
Chrome did it.
Yeah, just Chrome did it, and Opera, I guess.
Yeah, Shadow DOM, it's all the major breadboard.
They're all going to. Yeah.
Yeah, so.
And then we'll also get slots as well. So think kind of like NG content. There was also an update to the CanLoad interface. You also get the URL segments now in that interface. So when you do your CanLoad method, There's also NG do bootstrap. So there's a new lifecycle method for your applications. This is going to run when the application gets bootstrapped, the initial bootstrapping, right? And then unfortunately, no IV renderer yet. So that'll be the third version of the renderer for Angular. That's not quite ready for prime time. Made a lot of good progress on it over the last few months. The code is in there though, so it's behind a flag. So if you want to play with it, you can actually start to kind of take a look at it. And then Angular Material 7 aligned with the 2018 Material spec from Google. We also got drag and drop functionality both in the CDK and in Angular Material. So even if you're not using Angular Material, maybe you're rolling your own component library, you can use the Angular CDK and hook into the drag and drop pretty easily. There's a new bottom sheet component, kind of like a quick action that just kind of is like maybe a third or a quarter way up your screen on the bottom. So it's a new component that they came out with. And then they also came out with new and improved Angular CLI schematics. So there you have it. There's your updates for November. Thanks, Jesse.
Excellent. Thanks. All right. So the really big announcement is we have been planning for months now. Since Angular Denver got done, we've been planning for another event called Evening of Angular. Who's been to Evening of Angular before? A few of you? Okay. So if you haven't been to this is an event that we put together. It's going to be held, can I leak some of the details? It's a couple. All right. So it's going to be held at the Alamo, which is located at approximately Sheridan and Colfax. It's a theater. And we bring in food. You can order dinner if you want. It's one of those really cool theaters where they're serving food and alcohol and bringing it out to you. And so we've got a couple of really pretty cool speakers coming out. Does anybody know who Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan is? Yeah, yeah. So if you don't know, those are the two guys that are maintaining NGRX right now. They're super awesome. They're great friends of ours, and we're excited to have them come out and speak. And another guy, anybody remember Joe Eames? Anybody been on Pluralsight and watched Joe Eames with Angular fundamentals and whatnot? So he's going to come out and give us a talk. He did that. He was actually here in August, and he was here last January as well for our inaugural Evening of Angular event. Another really good friend of mine that I went to Tel Aviv with, Kim Maeda, is going to come out all the way from Michigan. And she's going to come out and talk, and I'm really excited to see her as well. So there's a few more. I think there's a total of 5 or 6 speakers? 5 GDEs are coming to Denver to come speak. So I believe the initial price, we're looking around $25 for this ticket. Okay, we're bringing it to you as cheaply as we possibly can, and bringing you the people that you really want to meet and hear them talk. This should be technology that you're potentially using in your everyday work. It's a great opportunity to meet them in a really small environment. There's also some opportunities to get VIP tickets. What does a VIP get? Well, one of the things that we do is you could be part of the speaker lunch and be able to hang out with these speakers, ask them questions, have direct access to them. We also then have a VIP plus weekend. So when I bring all these people out, I don't just say, hey, thanks for coming, see you later. I'm like, no. Your plane ticket doesn't get you home until Sunday, okay? Your plane ticket gets you home on Sunday because we're going to take you up to the mountains, and we're going to go skiing and snowboarding. We're going to go check out a distillery tour. We're going to do some fun stuff up in the mountains, and we're going to make an event of it. Mr. Spivey, how was that for you?
Fantastic.
Was that awesome or what?
It was fantastic.
So literally we're in a restaurant. It's like, hey, see all the appetizers? We'll take one of each. And we'll take one of every entree as well.
You say you're full, and he goes, all right, another round.
So we had a really great time. That's another opportunity that's available to you. And so we should have, the tickets go on sale on November 16th. And it should, like I said, it should be around $25. We're not exactly sure on that price point, but we're going to keep it as low as we possibly can so everybody can attend. Any profit that comes from this will be donated. So last year, I believe we were able to donate $2,400, I believe, to a nonprofit that works with kids with technology. So it's a really positive way for us to all give back, see some amazing speakers, just get together and have a really fun night. All right, so just so everybody knows, we are live streaming on YouTube. We've been doing this for a while, and so that means when, as a speaker, if a question comes in, the best thing I can ask you to do is please repeat the question so that people in the audience on YouTube can hear that. And also make it into the actual official recording that people can watch later. All the talks that we do get published to YouTube. And so right now there's, I think, over 3 years of YouTube videos. Back to maybe, hopefully not the original one that I did on testing. Hopefully that one got deleted. But yeah, there's all sorts of content out there for you to be able to check out and learn if you're looking for something in particular. So no further ado here, I want to introduce our first speaker. This is a friend of mine, a gentleman that I met, what did we meet, about a year ago? About a year ago, and he's been gracious with Charter that hosted one of our events, gosh, I think back in March or so of last year, or I guess it's still this year, yep. And has been a great friend. We go catch lunch every couple of months and catch up and what's going on. He's got a lot of really cool stuff and great ideas, and I'm super excited to present Jose Estrella. Give it up.
Let me first start off by saying that I'm not a senior developer. I don't think I classify myself as a mid-level developer either. I'm really passionate more than anything else. If anything, I might be junior. I do know that I can get the job done, which is the point. And I'm trying to say all of this because of the fact that this isn't my day job, and I just do it out of the love of it. And frankly, by coming to these events, I end up learning. I know, for example, one of the first exposures for NGXS was when Jesse just bombarded me with that. And I was like, yeah, of course. And I didn't say anything because I didn't want to feel like the only person who didn't know anything. But as I grew to learn NGXS, whatnot, I saw how complex it was. It became quite familiar. Nonetheless, there's still a lot of boilerplate and whatnot. And so then I stumbled upon NGXS, which was started by a gentleman named Austin out of Texas. So if anyone wants a t-shirt or a water bottle, please ask. Let me just jump right into it. So I don't really have any slides. And instead, I just built a very basic application. And this just has several components, and just to show you what it looks like, I have a component for buttons, and all that it is really is these two buttons that you see here. It also has, and if you're wondering, the two big libraries that I really have here is Bootstrap, and is really the actual Bootstrap. So I'm using jQuery. Forgive me for those who think it's a sin. And I also have NGXS, so it's really bare. It doesn't really have anything else outside of that. I have another input component, which is just this bottom bar down here. And then I have another component, a modal. So this is one modal.
Can you make that bigger?
Yes, sir. Of course.
I can't see it.
Oh, got it. Let's see.
I am.
And so essentially I have three main components. One component, this button component really, that has aside from having the buttons that you see, I also put one of the modals there, and then I broke out another modal really on its own component just to kind of showcase the power and ability. Now, frankly, this is what it is. When I click on this open modal local, all it's really doing is calling the basic Bootstrap. Where is it? Right here, where it's just you doing the data toggle, whatnot. So this is calling this down here. This is fine, but the problem, of course, with this is that if you want to break this out into a separate component or somewhere else, it starts to become difficult. Even if you start to do parent-to-child relationships or whatnot, just so that you can pass data, it starts to become complex. To backtrack a little bit, what NGRX is and what state management is, if some of you aren't aware, it's nothing more than, I consider it, frankly, a front-end database. You can say a way where a front-end data store, and that's all it really is. And so instead of having to constantly send calls back to the actual server, you actually go back to the server, get a group of data that you're probably going to end up needing, pass it forward, and then you work from there. If you need more, you pass one or two more calls, but you're essentially modifying that front-end store, and you call back to the database whenever you need to. And so you can frankly use these state managements, these stores, not only to do actual data storage, you could say, in the front end, but you could also do it to activate components. And in this case, for example, this first button is using Bootstrap, but this bottom button is actually using NGXS. And I'm actually, if we look at the code, I'm actually doing this. So up here, I'm calling a specific function to open a modal, and all it's doing is dispatching open modal. Open, and there's nothing to do here in the action. I'm not really passing anything, but whenever that's executed, all it's really doing is calling this remote modal to pop up. Now, one of the key differences too is that right now I'm actually calling this the modal that's actually contained within this component, not within this component. But if I wanted to call this the modal that's contained here, which is example modal, I can easily just go here and change this to here. And then when this refreshes, I'm calling the same modal here. You know, now all of this contained within the same component. But so essentially, I'm using NG in this case the state management to be able to call different components and to essentially play with the website's DOM aside from just passing data. And now to pass data is as simple as frankly doing the same thing. In this case, I'm just using one state management. The way the input is, I built the input is simple. Let's see. Here we go. So there's nothing more than I'm using reactive forms, and it's just an input and then a button, and that's it. But when I call the input in the backend, I'm just dispatching a new modal data. So once I get the text that's inputted and I submit it, I'm just dispatching here. So when I go in the backend, it's just frankly a pass through here, and it actually gets processed here. So here, this patch state, and this is to me why I really enjoy NGXS over NGRX, is because of the fact that the first parts, the actions and whatnot, those are the simple ones. You know, they're both similar, but where they differ is frankly the fact that NGRX uses reducers, right? And that gets quite complex. And in my tiny little brain, I couldn't really comprehend to the furthest extent as suggesting some of you guys that you're experts, you can definitely do this. But me, I'm like, yeah, I have no clue what it's really doing or saying, and I would really have to spend more than I care to eventually get it to work, because I have to split, then join, then do something or other or whatnot, and using a lot of techniques that maybe an advanced person is very used to. But in my case, this was much simpler, because here all I'm really doing is literally getting the same data that I pushed into the store, and then I can either patch the data or I can set it. And the only difference is that in this case, for example, just to show, I have two different, let's say, datas, modal and data. If I do set state, what it'll do is that it'll only push to the store whatever I set. But if I do patch, it's like a merge. And just to showcase what I mean by that, this is what I mean by that. Because I put patch state, then they both stay there. But had I put set state, then modal would have gone away and only data would have stayed. Nonetheless, I can enter what I want here, and then when I hit submit, I see the data. One thing also, what I find really fascinating about NGXS is the fact that I didn't put it here, but even when building custom selectors, it's actually so much simpler. Let me see if I can actually quickly pull an example of what that might look like. So this is another project that I've been working on, and here, for example, this is what a selector, one of my selectors looks like, where I'm actually just going in there and I'm pulling from the full state. I just want users, and all I'm really doing is getting a specific set of data from that state, which to me, when I look at this, it makes a lot more sense than when I originally had to learn how to make custom selectors through NGRX. And so I think this is one of the biggest reasons why I started to go this route, because it seemed a lot more intuitive when building things and not as complex, frankly. And I know I'm saying the same thing, but ultimately, one of the last things, of course, to do is to be able to pull the data. And it is as simple, frankly, as just using this select. I called this particular one layout, just because that's what I was using. But if we look at what the data looks like here, to be able to, give me a sec to zoom in. To be able to select the data, all you really need to do, for example, if you want to select all of it, is literally call that with the select function. And now I have any and all the data that's nested within here. But if I want to just get a particular branch of it, I can easily create a custom selector so that I only get that. And then I just call that. And then ultimately on the front end, it's nothing more than an observable. And I'm just bringing this forward as modal, and then I just want the data portion of that. And so this is why whenever I pass things here, it's coming in as the data, if that makes any sense.
The whole data.
Yes, the whole object is being passed forward in this case. But so that's my presentation. Forgive me for not having slides.
What's the plugin?
The plugin? Sorry? Oh, that's all really NGXS, similar to NGRX, where they have their own debug plugin. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, and give me a minute to bring that up. And it's very similar to. So of course, this is the module NGXS, and then this is the Redux Tools plugin. And in my case, for example, all I did was really break out the state into its own part of the core module. And I think this is one of the things that also fascinated me too, is that the fact that when with NGRX, I would have to have normally 4 files, action effects as well. Whereas here, I really have all of that self-contained. So I would put a HTTP call within right before here, and I would just put it in there. And whenever I get back, I would just go ahead and patch it right to the state or set the new state or whatnot, as well as have the selectors right above. So now, instead of having one massive store with multiple different files and having a file be the center for that, let's say the effects, here what I'm actually doing is breaking down the data into its own little stores. And so in this case, I have the layout store with its own small number of selectors, small number of actions, but all self-contained. So if there's an issues with the layout, then I can just go straight to that data set. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, please direct it to Jason.
All right. So hey, before you stop, I had a couple questions because it looks like the setup on this looks like it's really easy for you to get it set up and get the project going.
Yes, it was.
All right. And how was it working with the actions or the decorators to create actions and selectors? And was that really
everything? Yeah, everything about NGXS was so much easier to get up and running from the get-go, especially knowing nothing. I know, for example, in my case, when I started to dive into NGXS, I already had some level of exposure with NGRX, and all I knew was that this is complicated. And if I really want to get advanced at NGRX, it's going to be even more complex, right? And I know that Jesse and others, have been working on different libraries to make NGRX a lot simpler to do, so that you don't have to do as much boilerplate and whatnot. Nonetheless, there were still, without having all that prior knowledge, it was still, it wasn't easy to get into, frankly.
Nice. So those, if you don't know, Austin McDaniels was here this past August. He's a good friend of mine, and he's the one that wrote this library. So this is a really great alternative if you want to do NGRX, but you need it to be smaller, but you don't want to use something like MobX or whatnot. It uses patterns that you're already familiar with, where you're applying decorators to functions, and it's really easy to work with. So this might be a really good alternative for you for a really small app to be able to build something very, very quickly. Or like in your case, where you didn't have the NGRX experience, that this is a really quick way for him to get up to speed. So
yeah, and the beauty of this too, if anything, is that because of a lot of this is similar to NGRX, at some point it should be much easier to segue from here into NGRX, especially as I need to get more complex. But I know from the get-go. So yeah, if you questions.
Yeah, could you just cover the components once again? You don't have reducers, you don't have selectors.
Yes, no. So you do have selectors. It's just that they're one contained within the state file, actually. So instead of having a custom selector that you might have somewhere else, because you might have a lot more lines of code. It is literally as simple as this. Now, this is interestingly a lot bigger of one of. Let me see if I can find an easier selector. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I can. It was somewhere.
You don't have that link anymore, do you?
I don't know. Yeah, let me bring it up again. Give me a sec. One second.
All right, that's okay. Go ahead and just show the code, and we'll
okay.
Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see that over. Oh, there we go. There. Oh, right.
That took a minute.
Share.
Perfect. Sorry. Better? All right, sorry. So what does that look like? I was going to show an example of what a selector. So in this case, for example, all I'm really doing is pulling out of the state. I'm just pulling shifts, and then I'm just turning it into really an array more than anything else. And so it is as simple as just these 4 lines of code. Whereas I know previously when I was diving into NGRX, I had to go to a separate file and do a bunch of things that I didn't understand. I did, and eventually worked. But yes, sir.
So how do you think this scales for, you were saying a small project, Jesse, does this scale or no, like enterprise?
Yes, I've seen this scaled in large applications as well, where if you start to get into more complicated actions and reducers and effects, then it may not be your best choice. Again, it's all about design decisions and how you're kind of building it. And it also comes down to preference. What do you enjoy working with? Does this actually resonate more for you? Then great, use this. In the back end of what it's actually storing in the client-side store is almost identical. It's just a different approach. And Austin, what he talks about when you look at this is that, when we're building components, we're using decorators. We're using @component to create a decorator on our class here, and then it has the component features to it, right? Well, the same thing with what he's doing with actions and selectors and whatnot. Now on this, on model data here, I'm able to apply action to it, and now it has that. It's now available to me. I can call it as an action. Again, it comes down to preference and style and what works well for you. I tend to come from a school, having come up through Visual Basic, where everything was implicit, and I didn't really understand what was going on, and that would actually harm me in a project. So I tend to be more explicit, and I want to see what the actions are and the reducers and how things are working, because it's great that it'll save me some time up front, but when it gets more complex and I have to get outside of that box, it might be really difficult for me to be able to do that. It might not be quite as easy. Again, though, this is up to you. This is a preference and a choice that you would be making. So,
and to his point, ultimately, what fits better, because there are several frameworks that seem to be doing the same thing, using the same Redux tool. So on the front end of it all looks the same. But yet, when you start to dive into it, what works best for you for what you're doing, and then how complex do you really need to be? And if you do, then I would always follow what Jesse says. I'm sure Jesse would go.
All right, everybody give it up again for Jose. So thank you very much.
I'll disconnect.
Yep. Okay. All right, we have a second speaker tonight. I'm super excited. Spivey. This is from Charter and doing some really awesome. We're very excited to see. It's on one of my favorite subjects, which is on NGRX entity. This is something that I have used quite a bit, and the teams that we work with have used quite a bit. And so this is a really great way of hoping to organize your data a little bit better on the client side. And so with that, I give you James Spivey, NGRX entity, and the forgotten package. All right, give it up for James. Thank you, Lon.
Who here knows what NGXS is? Handful of people, okay. And so I call it the package because it's kind of a scout package. It's been out for a while. I really like it. I think it's a really useful feature for a lot of us that do sort of standard operations. So I figured I'd do a deep dive. We can sort of get into it a little bit more and talk about what we see here. Sorry. I think our live share needs a microphone.
I turned you on.
All right.
You're good.
I want to make sure I get the presentation for you right. All right. So for Q&A, my name is James. I'm CTO, architect, founder, everything. Right now, I've been contracting with Charter for since January, helping them out on the doing a lot of cool stuff over there. We're driving out as much as we can. Thank you to my Charter cohort for joining me. Always fun to have some workers around. So let's talk a bit about first about Redux and NGRX. Redux is so that we kind of get a baseline who has worked with Redux or NGRX. So most everyone be familiar. Functional programming, right? Immutable, unidirectional, really important for large scale stuff that we want to look for. A big part of this is a single source of truth. That's what they really emphasize a lot. Running a project where using all those data through various services, and you push the service and maybe somebody else and you don't really understand. There's a lot of those kind of nice part about Redux is the process way directional flow of data where nobody knows that's our truth and it won't be on, and it's easily traceable. Basic premises in Redux: stores, reducers, and actions. That was briefly covered by Jose. I know a lot of people here have heard the term boilerplate. We'll talk a little bit about it. Entity is a response to that to a degree. But we have our stores, we have our reducers, we have our actions. This was a Facebook premise that came out of Flux. Dan Abramoff and Andrew Clark are the people who created the Redux pattern, really pioneered it for React and those sort of libraries, which brings us to NGRX. Is a collection of libraries. It utilizes RxJS, which we all know and love because we're all in the Angular community. Thank you, Ben. Love you to death, buddy. It was really designed so that by Rob Wormwald, who is also an awesome guy. You should come see him. He was here for the Angular Denver. He's hilarious. He did the keynote. Absolutely follow him on Twitter. He doesn't maintain it anymore, but he was sort of the godfather, if you will, of this. And his premise was, let's take React and let's make it more Angular friendly. Let's put this into the Angular style of doing things. So RxJS being a big part of that, right? We do everything through observables, so we should be utilizing them in full. It has a number of libraries in it. A couple of the terms you've already heard, so store effects. There is the router store, which is Angular specific, right? So that as things in the router occur, we can track that through our state management system, do things with it, preload, get side effects, that sort of stuff. Store dev tools, which was sort of what you saw there, that plugin that you asked about. That is through the store dev tools. So that will actually show you your history of your actions and then what that did to your state. So you can see your before, your after state, what your current state is, and actually track where your actions are occurring. There's a number of really great talks on why that's important. The term boilerplate around your actions is more actions is better because then you have more traceability about where your stuff came from. Entity, which is what we're talking about here, always fun. And then schematics, schematics being sort of their newest one. And that's to help you generate your state based off what they believe are best practices and help you produce things for that. So you can find all that here under platform. That one's kind of important because they mono-repoed it. So the platform area is where they keep all of these packages under, as opposed to some of their older ones. You'll find them in other repos. Those are no longer actively maintained. The platform is where you find everything. It's the all-encompassing umbrella. So what is Entity? Clickbaity title, just to get you guys all excited about this. I know you're all super excited. Entity is an entity state adapter for managing record collections. Basically what that means is this is a tool to reduce the boilerplate. Sorry, Brandon, please don't block me on Twitter. If you ever see him at NG Conf, he talks about that a lot. He hates the term boilerplate. The idea here is that this package is designed to help you with standard CRUD operations and reduce what people deem as boilerplate, the stuff that you do over and over and over again in your reducers, the stuff you don't want to do, your create, read, update, and deletes. It is also extremely type safe, which is really, really important. As my team knows, I hate the keyword any. I don't really like it. I don't really let people use it because I think it's a bad practice, right? We can get into a lot of trouble, especially with runtime null pointers when we allow that to be a thing. So I try to keep any out, and that's why I really like about Entity is that we can have type safe control through the entire process of create, read, update, and delete so that we always know we're doing the right actions and we have less bugs that come out of that. It is also extremely extensible and flexible. So while it does give you standard operations for a collection, it allows you to do a number of other things that you're used to doing in your state management that are really important, such as like error states, loading, all the other things that you want to append upon your state. This doesn't prevent you from doing that. Using this adapter isn't going to kick you out of the stuff you're used to doing and want to have in your state management. So I think that's really important. Really easy to add our sort of standard commands here. It's just at their mono repo, so the at ngrx and then entity. So if you want to give it a shot, that's the fastest way to get it going. The three main features of ngrx entity: interfaces, entity adapter, which is the main sort of brains behind all of this, and then the selectors that come out of that. The interfaces that we'll talk about, we're going to talk about all these in detail. I'm going to try to do as deep a dive as I can for you here. We will have questions at the end, so we'll definitely go through a QA if you get lost or want to ask more. The interfaces are really what derive how you're going to operate with everything. We all understand what an interface is. Really useful tool. They base everything off of sort of these standard interfaces that you'll interact with. Our entity adapter, as I said, is the brains. So it's going to be the thing that we interact with in both our selectors and in our reducer. And then our selectors are actually, it's not necessarily a part of entity, but the part that comes out of the adapter really drives how these selectors work. So we're going to get into that as well so that you can really see how it is. I also have, I'm going to present to you something, everything that's in this presentation is in their docs. So you can find all the examples in the docs. So I try to keep it as close to those as possible so that when you got in there, you'd be able to look at them and go, this looks familiar. I've seen this before. There is going to be a little bit at the end where I'm going to diverge from the docs from sort of a way I like to do things, a system that I've kind of come up with after working on some projects with Nathan Walker and some of the maintainers here and some of the ways of doing things. So it's going to be a little different, and I'll definitely highlight that for you. But just so that you're aware at the end, it's going to be a little different, and I'll show you why, and I think you're actually really going to like it. So interfaces. The entity state, this is the most important part, and this is how you're going to basically base all of your state. This is the base interface for the shape of the state you're storing. So here we have either an array of strings or an array of numbers, and then we've got the entities here, which is a map, and it will either have an ID of a string or a number, and then this is our type safe right here. This is what's actually what you base all of your state on, and the reason that this is really important is that IDs is going to be an array, and it's just an array of either numbers or strings, and it will be sortable. And this is how we actually maintain the sort order in everything that's stored. And the reason we don't store everything is speed. So entities is a map, and that's a lot faster when we do lookups for CRUD reasons. It's much more performant to use a map than it is to use an array. So the array is to maintain the sort order, and then the map is what actually stores the values. So if then we want a particular value out of that array, we can use it to go look up in the map and get our value very quickly. So this means that if you're going to store a large, substantial amount of data that you really need accessible, and it comes back to you as some big JSON array, you just dump it into entities, and it's going to handle all of this stuff for you. You don't have to worry about the map actions or any of that stuff. So we're going to get in a bit more about how all that works, but this is the basis of how it all goes for you. So the big ones being the speed advantage. So I'll let you read that for a second there. Can maintain sort order. So let's look at an example. We're going to use the standard examples from their repo. It's going to be standard user storage. So we're going to have our user interface, which is an ID, has an ID of string and a name string. Then we're going to have our state, which is the thing you kind of seen a little bit from Jose's presentation about what your standard state with the things you maintain in it. And it's going to extend that entity state from NGRX using our type safe so that we make sure we're storing that entity of user. And then we can append additional things to it. So this is where you could put loading, errors, whatever you might need. I don't, your roles, things that may be outside the realm of what's inside of your user entity, you can store them all here. We're going to use a standard one just for demo's sake of selected user ID, which could either be a number, or if we have strict checking, null or undefined. I'm a big fan of strict, by the way, too. If you put strict true on your TS config, it saves you a lot of pain later down the line.
Be number or string, right?
Yeah, I messed that one up. I apologize. You're right. This is correct. This should be a string because this would be matching on that. So that's my mistake. The next one is entity adapter. As I said, this is sort of the big one. I know it's a little hard to see. There's a lot to kind of squeeze in here. This is the standard interface for the entity adapter. It is the brains behind how NGRX entity works. It has a number of things here that are important and a couple that not as important. So let's talk about that a little bit. Select ID is the most important thing. You need to have that. What NGRX does for you out of the box is that in terms of how it knows how to build that IDs array and the entities array is based off what that ID is. But it needs to know how to get that ID. So the important part here is that we're going to have a function that you're going to pass in that entity that you have. So in our case, it would be user. And it's going to dig into that user object and return me the ID. And that will then build my ID array and then my entities map. So that's extremely important. You basically cannot use this without that function. Some of the optional ones. Sort compare. So let's say that we want to have all of our entities sorted by last name. Well, this would be a function that would take user A, user B, dig into those objects, look at their last name, and sort by that. So that's really important. The get initial state. This is basically how you derive, if you're used to NGRX and how you do things now, you always set that initial state. The thing that you're going to have your defaults, like I'm not loading at the moment, I have not failed, all that sort of stuff. Get initial state will be useful for that. And then the last and most important is the get selectors. And we're going to talk about this one a little bit further here shortly. But basically, that's how we're going to get all of this data back out in a standard method. That's the selectors part of that third branch we talked about earlier. So let's look at an example of this. This is my example with users again. So we have my adapter here. We're going to set it as a constant so that we can use it again and again and again. It is type safe, of course. I've got my select ID, so I pass it my user, and I'm going to bring back out that ID. And that's a string. Nailed it this time. And then I got my sort compare, user A, user B, and I'm going to look here. I got their name, and I'm going to sort. Standard 0, -1, 1 kind of sort compare here. And then our initial state. So we take our adapter, we get our initial state, and we pass it our initial state, which is that my initial option is that I don't have a user selected. So that's how we set our defaults and get everything up and going. So we basically now essentially bootstrapped our safe. We are good to go. This is how you use the adapter in your reducers. So the nice part about this is typically where you get that boilerplate. The adapter is our tool for adding to that map and pulling out of that map. I've condensed this a bit from their examples. The adapter itself does a fair amount more than what's actually listed here. So I try to kind of condense it to make it actually visible to y'all. But the big ones, right, is add, update, delete, load, clear. So in this scenario, it has a function called add1. We take our payload of our user that we get back from whatever it is that we're getting. And we also have to do what with NGRX? Immutable state. So we have to give it our state object. And what that's going to do is it's going to add this user. And then this is going to return our new state object because we never modified the existing state. We always make sure that we produce a new one. So the adapter makes sure to always give you back that new state. Same goes for upload or update. We're going to take user, we're going to pass our state, and we're going to get back our new one. Big ones for this is that you're passing the whole user object. And the reason for that is that select ID. It knows how to dig into that user from that select ID and figure out which one you're either adding or updating. So when it updates, because of that select ID, it's going to dig into this, find that ID, go find that in your map, and update the map accordingly with what you have now. So big things to be aware of that is if you're trying to update something and it got a new ID, you will have a problem with this because it will not find it then, right? You would fail it. So you need to make sure that you're removing and then adding in that scenario if it's getting new IDs. Hopefully your IDs aren't changing very often, but be aware of that as a caveat because that can be a thing if you have a system that functions that way or you chose the wrong ID. If you have an ID that's constantly shifting on you, that could be problematic. Here for delete, it's really easy. We just pass the ID. We don't need to know the whole object. We don't need to dig into it. That's just wasted resources, right? So we just have the ID. We go find the ID. We get rid of it. Easy peasy. For this, loading users, this is what you'll probably standard like hydrate, right? You pass your users, your state, hydrated. Good to go. Now your map's full, your IDs are full, everything's sorted, and you're ready to go. So you can start using it however your functions might occur to display an inventory list, a user list, whatever. And then the clear ones, this one's kind of unique, right? We're not actually passing users in the clear situation. We're just clearing it, but we're also providing it our state object as we always do. But we can use this opportunity to destructure and then pass it some defaults back that we want to reset with. So for clearing, right, we know we're not going to have a selected user anymore because we have no more users. So we destructure state, and we take that selected user ID we had before, and because this is still type safe off the state, we know this exists, and then we give it back the default of null. And then that way, everything's reset. So if you had like loading or an error state, you could also use this to reset that and go back to square one. And frankly, you can do that with any of these. If you have like loading situations, you can do that with any of these. It's just destructuring an object, same deal. So the selectors. There's a lot to these, but they're actually pretty simple. This is the interface state for them. It gets a little confusing, and we'll talk a bit about more. Actually, I'll go back and kind of explain this first. All of this was designed to be very flexible for you for advanced usage. So you saw this part here that says select state. It allows you to pass a state object after you've initially defined it. This is not a practice most anybody uses, but I just wanted you to be aware of it so you would see it. And so why I mention that is in this scenario, you see the same thing here. When you look at these, it makes you feel like you have to pass the state. That's actually not how this is going to work through that destructuring process. So we have some important ones, select IDs, which is either that array of strings or array of numbers. We have our dictionary, which is, this is their term. It's not actually like technically a dictionary. If you look at the interfaces in their repo, it's just a map. But that's our type safe map. Then we have select all, and what this does is it returns everything that's in that map as an array sorted by what your sort compare function was. So this is really useful if you're going to have like a user list or something like that. You don't have to select the entities and then figure out how to turn them into an array and do that whole nonsense for you. They've got a utility function for you to do that. And then select total here, it's just the number of count that you have in your array at that moment. So that way, if you had a user count, something that was really important to you, you could do that. And that'd be a good way to have that. And these are basically, I look at these as the base that you'll use for all of your extended selectors. Most of us are used to not having very basic selectors. I personally use selectors more than I use reducers. I think they have more power in reusability as memory selectors. That means that they're very reusable to have that snapshot of data. And I don't like doing a lot of manipulation in the reducer. I'd rather store the data the way it came and then do manipulation as it comes out, rather than doing manipulation and then storing it. Your use case might be different. That's just how I prefer to do it. Everyone has a slightly different way of doing it. But I look at these as sort of the base, so you can use these then to build selectors off. You know, normally we just do select state, and then we grab a bunch of stuff and we do a lot of modification to it, kind of how you saw there. The way to keep our selectors a little more simple is to have this method of, you know, grab me my array, or maybe I just need one thing out of the entities. Let's do it that way. So we can look at examples of these. This is a debate that I had with B-Love back there a couple of times. There's different ways of doing this, and typically what you'll see in the docs, and the docs have even changed beyond this, so this isn't even what they show anymore. This is kind of how the bottom half is kind of how the standard works in examples. So you used to see this in their docs, and this is kind of the way, which is we call our get selectors, and then we destructure everything and alias them to functions that we'll reuse elsewhere. So what this does is get selectors returns me select IDs, select entities, select all, select total, like you saw, and then we alias those to use elsewhere. And the reason for that is, and the reason the bottom example is more common is typically in NGRX, you export everything in your file, and there's no structure to it, right? These aren't classes. So it's just a ton of stuff you're exporting. And you're either doing bad practice of, you know, import star and everything in it, you know, from state or whatever the sort of practice is, or you're importing individual things. You got this giant import, a ton of stuff in there. So the reason that aliasing occurs most typically is because it means that if you've got multiple pieces of state in a component or a service somewhere where you're selecting, you can differentiate between what's what, right? So we don't get confused about what I'm selecting. We want to make sure that I'm always selecting users versus my inventory, something like that. It's for clarity's sake. Personally, I find this very confusing. I don't think that's visually very easy to look at. I think there's too much room for typos, confusion, and I also like standards. So if I'm going to have a lot of state objects, I want the shape of my state very easy to work with. I want when my developers come into the state, they know that they're going to have certain things available to them, like select IDs, select entities, select total. I want those things to be standard names so that if I import my state, they're going to look at that standard and go, I've got these 4 things and I know I've got them. So like loading state, I want it always to be select loading. I don't want select loading, more or something else. I want it standards, because then it's very easy to bounce between different levels of state and know how you're operating between those different levels. So you see my note there about preferring not to destructure. Let's look at a complete example of how all of this works. We've got our namespace here, and this is sort of how I define things. This is my ideal. This is what I said is a little different from what you'll typically find. And the reason I like this is that it makes my imports nice and clean. It's very easy to operate with. And I think it also makes the ability to reason about what you're operating with very straightforward. You kind of see this a bit. Jose showed it a bit in NGXS. Austin got it right in saying that you have state. State contains things, and you do stuff with state. If I've got selectors, I'm pulling something out of state, so it should be named under state. So all of his selectors are under the state class. The examples in NGXS don't necessarily match that, and that I don't like as much as a style. Because for me, if I'm getting loading, I know where I'm getting it from, which is my state. I'm not getting it from my effects. I'm not getting it some random class. I'm getting it from state, so I want to name it that way. So the big thing for me was putting it under a namespace. This is a thing you don't see very often. It's a standard I picked up a bit from Nathan Walker, working with him for his presentation for NGConf. And I thought it was a really, really smart way of encapsulating everything that we work with. So what you do is you wrap it all under namespace, and you still do all the standard export stuff that you're used to from the examples. But then when you do an import, you just import user state, and it's user state.adapter, user state.initial state, and then user state.select state, user state.select IDs. It makes it a lot more easy to reason about what you're pulling, especially if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 different pieces of state you're trying to coalesce into one big thing. I'll get questions at the end. Is that all right? Okay, sure. Cool. And I can come back to all these slides, so I'll move back for you. So let's look at this example. Again, we're sort of back to our initial state that we showed before. Standard stuff there, right? Our adapter, same deal, although this time for condensing state, I took out the sorting. And then our initial state, same stuff you've seen before. Now we get into selectors. So type safe selector, create feature selector. This should be pretty straightforward stuff. You're used to this from NGRX. And then we have our adapter where we're getting our selectors. I only pulled the entities just for this one time for example's sake. You can pull all 4. There's no limit on that. And then here, I used just this initial one that you're used to where you get the state out of it. It's a standard selector. It has nothing to do with NGRX entity. So it's pretty straightforward. And then I use select selected user. So here, I take my select entities, and then I get my select user ID, and then there's my entities object. And because it's a map, I just pull that ID and we're good to go. So then it's very, very efficient. I'm not looping 10,000 items in there, right? I'm just grabbing from the map the one thing I wanted. And then for type safe reasons, I return undefined. Let's say our user our selected becomes unavailable because memoiz things happen as changes occur, right? So if I clear this out to null, that would clear this, and then I would return nothing, so that's a failure. So if I don't have an ID, I should always be returning something. So this is a strict mode thing. So if you're not used to that, that's why I was doing that. In the example, it doesn't do that, but that's just a thing to be aware of. So that's kind of my complete example, a bit of how I like to do things. Again, not the standard you'll see in the docs. You can certainly ask me more questions about that one. I think it's a really, really great way, and you should definitely consider doing this. Even if you're not using entity, think about implementing a standard like that. It will help your teams immensely. I found it helped my teams a lot. So where to learn more? Ultimate Angular, ultimateangular.com, Todd Moto, phenomenal guy. Just got certified to be a race car driver because, you know, we're all bored, so why not just add some more stuff to our pile? He has a free YouTube video about it, so you can find it here. I'm going to show these slides, so you'll be able to get all this information, so don't feel like you have to type that all out. And then Angular University, also another really good resource. They have an awesome email blast that they send out with a lot of free guides, a lot of free information, really deep dive into different things. So I highly recommend following them. And they also have a free YouTube video on this. So you should check out both of those. Really great resources. People to follow, Mike Ryan and Brandon Roberts, as mentioned. They're going to be out here in January. Phenomenal guys. I absolutely love hanging out with them. They're a joy to talk to. So I highly recommend you get the VIP pass and hang out with these guys because it's worth it. Follow them on Twitter. They have lots of good random thoughts. And then, of course, please follow me. I don't tweet as much about interesting things, but I tweet about lots of random stuff. So that's exciting. And now QA. So what questions do you guys have? You have a question?
Yeah, I was just asking about the namespace. So that's a that TypeScript has then?
Yeah, that's a TypeScript feature, right? So it'll compile out. You won't have that in your source code that you compiled, but it allows you to sort of maintain a collection of one thing rather than having a lot of different stuff.
I just overlooked it, and that's the tip of the day.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I sort of have implemented, as my team knows, every file should have one class. I think files should be sort of condensed. It's easier to reason when there's only one thing that's coming out of a file. Anytime you find a TS file that's exporting a dozen different things, it gets very confusing, right? Like if you're trying to look for a particular thing to go maintain, typically your first thought is, let's look at the file name of, let's look at there's a function that's failing in my debug code. How do I get to it? Well, I'll start typing that thing out in the file name looking to find it. Well, if I've buried a dozen things in one TS file that I'm exporting, it's really hard to figure out where that thing is. If my file exports one thing, it's much more logical and reasonable for me to be able to then figure out what's in it. So this, like I said, was a thing. I didn't invent it. I didn't come up with it, but it was a pattern I saw, and I thought it was really, really good. And it's a pattern NGRX doesn't really follow that I think NGXS was trying to solve. So it was a thing that they were working on as let's make this more Angular-like. And I think that's one of the other things I hear a big complaint about NGRX. Not very Angular-like, doesn't have decorators and all that stuff. Well, these small bits of patterns are what help you get there. Shoot.
You're not really introducing the reducer pattern here to accomplish CRUD operations on collection.
One of the arguments for why Austin started NGXS was he wasn't a fan of reducers.
Right.
And reducers are a big pattern in Redux, though. Is I can then do all my modifications and then return my new version of state because we don't mutate what we're doing. Only side effects can have any amount of mutation technically. So this was really just to reduce the complexity of your reducers. It was the ability to, rather than rewriting the same code over and over again about how to inject a single item in, there's a lot more to it than this, than just add, update, remove. There's patch. There's a number of other features that the adapter that has even deeper usage than I'm presenting here, just for time and condense. Yeah, for that sake. It's just trying to make your reducers cleaner.
It's the bare minimum kind of,
right,
of what you have to invoke your reducer to do.
Correct. And so you can do additional stuff on top of this. If there's additional things that you need to do to accomplish what you're trying to do, but the idea, right, is let's make these files small. Let's make them easy to reason. Let's make them a thing that I can be approachable to looking at, as opposed to a ton of destructuring and a ton of array manipulation and all the other stuff that I think people tend to complain about when it comes to looking at big, heavy reducers.
I'm trying to choose right now on a side project whether to do my state manager is getting on whether I should do NGXS or NGRX.
And that's a tough one. I mean, I'm a big fan of XS as well. I've used it on a number of projects. If you look at my GitHub, it's the same as my Twitter handle, so github.com/myspivey. I just recently got certified in blockchain, so I did an Ethereum certification. It was an academy course that took about 6 months. And we did a final project, and part of that was to implement a product. And in the blockchain world, it's all React and whatever. I wasn't a fan of that. Forget that, we're Angular people. So I had to do mine in Angular, right? So I also wanted to push myself a little bit more and let's learn some new stuff. So I put NGXS to its full paces just to see what it could do. And I'm a big fan. I think what Austin did, he actually handed it over now. He's a trader and left us. Austin, I'm saying that to you on the live feed. You're a trader, you left us for React. Yep, so he's handed it over the lead maintainer role, but it's a great library. It does a lot of really cool things. There's definitely ways to get in a lot more trouble with it though. If you are not careful, it's much more, it is very easy to mutate stuff that you didn't intend to mutate and then get a lot of awful side effects because you did not realize what you were doing. Those actions can really cause you a lot of problems when you start trying to do a patch and then doing a ton of crazy stuff with that. It's a thing you can do and I've seen it done, so be careful. NGRX, I think I like it because it makes it very, very hard. It's not to say you can't do those things, but it makes it very hard to do those things. So it's based off your needs, your requirements. Again, we kind of talked about that in the last presentation about how far do you want to go. NGRX has a lot of overhead. I mean, I think I heard somebody talking about it earlier, like, oh man, I have an actions file and I got an effects file and I got this file and the other file, and it just feels like a lot of stuff. For a large scale enterprise product, that's a good thing. It's good to have a verbose but very clear collection of things. If you try to condense all of that into one file, I mean, I think all of us have seen, you know, an Outlook app in a single file and it was 10,000 lines long and we're just like, oh, it hurts. So this is really designed to separate all of that. You know, I complained to Austin a little bit about how easy it is to build a big state file. Because if you do have semi-complex selectors and you have a very large state object, it becomes a very unwieldy thing. So examples are good. Definitely dig into how to extract that into its own pieces and move them apart, which is, I think, what some of this is designed to do.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So the first one, I'm coming from Redux world, so there's a library called Normalizer, which sort of prepares for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't really put anything to reducer, but it basically parses your.
Yep.
And one feature it does, it allows you to sort of kind of provide types. And for example, if user has like posts, it allows you to actually get them out too. So if you have another state for posts, so you can do that. Like, it's pretty simple to implement that. You add both new users and new posts. Like, is there anything like that embedded into this entity?
So you can actually if I'm thinking of the same library, you can actually use that with this.
Okay.
In terms of it being natively, I don't believe so, but I could be wrong. My best suggestion in that, so that I'm not a fibber, is to reach out to Mike Ryan or Brandon Roberts and ask them that question. They would be much more authoritative in that one than I would be, and I don't want to tell you the wrong answer.
Okay. Just was one use case when we had like several dependencies, like all these relations, and it was very convenient to populate everything once. Like, you just extend.
Oh, so you had like two pieces that were kind of separated? Am I understanding that right?
Well, no, I mean,
so
they
like,
were just two like stores.
Mm-hmm.
So they were like user and post, and
gotcha. Okay.
It was basically updating them, but sometimes you download users and actually it automatically fetches some posts, and you just
right.
Put like.
So what's really interesting about that? No, this doesn't have that built in.
Okay.
I'm going to try to authoritatively say that this does not have that built in. It's not really designed for that. It's designed for separated states, and they try to push that your state should not be so complex that they have those integrations.
Okay.
John Papa's tool might. John Papa wrote a library that kind of sits above all of this and actually hides most of this. It's like, it's the CRUD king, if you will. And I heard it was supposed to be part of, Brian, did you hear?
Yeah, NGRX data.
Yeah, did that ever make it in? I didn't see it in the platform, but
it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. You might look into that. That's a really cool tool. It does also, it hides even more of this. The reason I'm not as big a fan is that, especially like in the charter world, we do a fair amount of manipulation of the stuff that's coming in and going out.
Yeah.
So I like that this is like the halfway house of that. It allows me to do a fair amount of manipulation, but also kind of hides some of the more redundant stuff that we do. But John Papa's makes a lot of assumptions about how you're going to put data in and get it back out. But you might look into that because it might already do some of that stuff. So,
all right. And the second question, you didn't really mention actions. So basically the process how we get data from. And yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, my question was like, for example, if I have different requests, like some requests I get data and I filter it like automatically. I never fetch it just, and I automatically filter it, let's say by age or by something. And should I create several stores for that?
So stores know if it's the same type of entity object, right?
Yeah,
a user
exactly.
is a user. It's always stored as a user. If you're going to do filtering, that's why I typically suggest that you just store everything unless there's a specific use case. And like I said, these are all the things that you kind of have to judge for yourself about how you do stuff. Like in my case, we only use entity on one of the 5 states that we manage actively because the rest are too complex for what it's doing.
Oh, okay.
But I typically argue get everything, and then in the selectors is where you would build that sort of filtering logic into, because those are memoirs. Every time you update the parent entity, the entire collection, those selectors then are immediately going to be available with all that new information. So they're really great for that sort of use case. If your concern is performance and I only ever want to call these particular things, if they're going to replace each other, entity is a great option for that, right? Like this replaces everything. You know, or you remove all and replace everything. If you want to maintain separate collections of the same entity, that's where it gets a little tougher. This is really designed primarily for one state, one object, it be a collection. The advanced usage stuff I kind of talked about briefly about how you would select certain states. You could pass it the state to then give me the return from the selectors. That might be a use case where you would use that. That would be a good scenario where your state's a bit more advanced than the standard interface. So you could have multiple state objects with different interfaces. So say filtered state 1, filtered state 2, and then when I create my adapter, I just pass in what I need and it gives me the selectors for that scenario, and you can then maintain it one state object. I would then start arguing though, you're getting into a level of complexity in your state that's not maintainable.
All right, thank you.
But it's up to your call. Anyone else? I guess not. So, well, thank you, everybody. You know, it was fun to give you a talk. Hope you learned a little something.
So would you say that this is the reducer to the reducer?
Ah, getting ephemeral on this one, are we? Yeah, meta reducers. So, I'll leave it to you, B-Love.
I guess, I don't know what this.
Yeah, just
Cool, guys. Thanks for coming out. Make sure you check out our Hangout. We're going to do a battery 620.